The church was packed for my father's funeral. James Miles had been a pillar of the community, building Miles Enterprises from a small residential contractor into the largest commercial developer in 3 states. Everyone who mattered was there, business associates, politicians, family, and friends, all paying their respects to a man who had built an empire worth over $75 million from nothing. I stood quietly near the casket, accepting condolences with my sister, Emma. We had both dropped everything to come home when Dad had his heart attack, but we'd arrived too late to say goodbye. Emma had flown in from her surgical residency in Boston, while I had left my architectural firm in New York. We had always been close, united by our shared grief after Mom died when we were teenagers, and now again by the loss of our father. "How are you holding up, Grace?" Emma whispered as another group of mourners moved past. "I'm managing," I replied, though the truth was I felt numb. Dad and I had always been close. As the daughter who followed him into the construction industry, albeit as an architect rather than a developer, we shared a special bond. Emma squeezed my hand as our cousin Jack approached, his wife, Gianna, at his side. Jack was Uncle Jackson's son, and he had been working at Miles Enterprises since college. While Emma and I had pursued our own paths, Jack had positioned himself as Dad's right hand, an apparent successor. "Grace." "Emma." Jack embraced us with practiced sympathy. "Your father was like a second father to me. This is devastating for all of us." There was something performative about his grief that set my teeth on edge, but I pushed the feeling aside. This wasn't the time. "Thank you for handling the arrangements," I said. Dad had suffered his heart attack at the office, and Jack had taken charge of everything while Emma and I were traveling home. "Of course," Jack nodded somberly. James would have expected nothing less. In fact, he'd been preparing me to take over more responsibilities. We'd been discussing my eventual transition into the CEO position. I blinked in surprise. This was the first I'd heard of any succession plan favoring Jack. Dad had always been tight-lipped about his business decisions, but this seemed like something he would have mentioned. "I'm sure we'll all have time to discuss the company after we've had a chance to grieve," Emma interjected smoothly, ever the diplomat. Jack's expression hardened slightly. "Actually, there are some matters that can't wait. I've scheduled a family meeting at the house after the reception. The lawyers will be there." After the burial, mourners gathered at my father's sprawling Victorian home on Lakely Drive. The house where Emma and I had grown up was now filled with visitors eating catered food and sharing stories about Dad. I moved through the rooms in a daze, accepting condolences and trying to process that he was really gone. "Grace." A familiar voice pulled me from my thoughts. I turned to see Robert Parker, Dad's longtime friend and the architect who had first inspired my career choice. "Robert, thank you for coming." We embraced, and I felt tears threatening again. Robert had been a fixture in our lives, almost family. "James was so proud of you," he said, his voice gentle. "He told everyone about your New York firm and the awards you've won." I smiled through my tears. We were working on a project together, actually, a community center downtown. Dad was providing the land and financing, and I was designing it. Robert looked surprised. I hadn't heard about that. We were keeping it quiet until the plans were finalized. Dad wanted it to be his legacy project: affordable housing, community spaces, a medical clinic. We were going to break ground next spring. Before Robert could respond, Jack appeared, announcing that the family meeting would begin in Dad's study. I excused myself and made my way through the house, finding Emma already seated in one of the leather chairs facing Dad's massive oak desk. Jack had positioned himself in Dad's chair, with Gianna standing beside him. 2 men in suits, lawyers, presumably, stood nearby. "Now that we're all here," Jack began once I had taken a seat, "we can address some urgent matters. As you know, James was the sole owner of Miles Enterprises and all its subsidiaries. With his unexpected passing, there are decisions that need to be made immediately to ensure business continuity. One of the lawyers stepped forward. I'm Lucas Carter, corporate counsel for Miles Enterprises. In the absence of a formally executed will. Wait. I interrupted. What do you mean, absence of a will? Dad definitely had a will. He updated it every few years. Jack cleared his throat. Unfortunately, there was an accident last week. James had his estate documents out for review, and there was a fire in the fireplace. A draft caught some papers, the will was destroyed. I stared at him in disbelief. And there were no copies. No backup with the lawyers or anywhere else. Your father preferred to keep his personal affairs private, Carter explained. He kept the original in his home safe. We were scheduled to review it this coming week, but... Emma leaned forward. This doesn't make sense. Dad was meticulous about everything, especially legal matters. Grief can be disorienting, Jack said with practiced sympathy. The important thing now is to establish interim leadership for the company. As the senior executive and James's closest male relative, I'm prepared to step in as acting CEO until more permanent arrangements can be made. The second lawyer distributed folders. We've prepared these interim management agreements. Essentially, they authorize Jack to manage all Miles' family assets and business interests while the estate is settled. Without a will, this process could take some time. I opened the folder and skimmed the document, my suspicion growing with every paragraph. The agreement would give Jack complete control over Dad's entire estate, the company, properties, investments, everything. And if we don't sign? Emma asked, always direct. Jack's smile tightened. Without clear authority, the company could face operational paralysis. Projects would stall, contracts could be jeopardized, and the value of the estate, your inheritance, could be significantly diminished. I closed the folder. We need time to review this with our own lawyers. Of course, Jack nodded magnanimously. But I should mention that there are several major deals in progress that require immediate attention. Any delay could be costly. We'll have our answer tomorrow, I said firmly. For now, I think we've had enough business talk for a funeral day. As the meeting broke up, I caught Carter giving Jack a subtle nod. Something wasn't right, and I needed to find out what before signing anything. That evening, after most of the mourners had left, Emma and I sat in the kitchen of our childhood home, trying to make sense of the day's events. There's no way Dad's will just happen to burn up right before he died, Emma said, voicing exactly what I'd been thinking. And there's no way he didn't have copies, I added. Jack is lying. Emma rubbed her temples. But why? Dad treated Jack like a son. He was already going to inherit something substantial. I thought about Jack's ambition, how he'd always wanted to be seen as Dad's successor. Maybe substantial wasn't enough. Maybe he wanted everything. Emma's expression darkened. What do we do? We can't prove anything, and without the will. I stood up suddenly, remembering something important. Dad took me to his bank last month. He showed me his safe deposit box and made sure I knew how to access it. He said it was just in case. Emma's eyes widened. Do you think? I don't know, I admitted. But it's worth checking. The bank opens at 9 tomorrow. The next morning, we arrived at First National Bank as soon as it opened. The manager, recognizing us as James Miles's daughters, expressed his condolences before escorting us to the vault area. Your father was one of our most valued clients, he explained as he located the correct box. He maintained several accounts and a safe deposit box for over 30 years. He used his key, and I used the key Dad had given me. The box slid out, and my heart raced as the manager discreetly left us alone with its contents. Inside were several sealed envelopes, a USB drive, and a leather portfolio. The largest envelope was labeled, "Last Will and Testament, Copy." "I knew it," Emma whispered as I opened the envelope. The will was comprehensive and crystal clear. Dad had left 30% of Miles Enterprises to me, 30% to Emma, 20% to Jack, and 10% to a charitable foundation he had established in Mom's name. He named me as CEO, citing my architectural vision and business acumen, with provisions for Emma to remain on the board despite her medical career. But that wasn't all. The leather portfolio contained detailed plans for the community center project I had mentioned to Robert, complete with funding allocations, land deeds, and architectural renderings I had created. Dad had already transferred the downtown property and $25 million in development funds to a separate LLC, jointly owned by him and me. The USB drive contained years of company records, including evidence that Jack had been systematically diverting company resources to side projects that benefited him personally. Not enough to be immediately noticeable, but substantial over time. He didn't just want to control the company, I realized aloud. He needed to cover up what he'd been doing. Emma squeezed my hand. "What's our next move?" I thought of Jack sitting in Dad's chair, so confident in his scheme. "We go to the meeting he's arranged, and bring some guests of our own." That afternoon, Jack greeted us with barely concealed impatience as we entered Dad's study. The signed management agreements were laid out on the desk, pens at the ready. "Have you made your decision?" he asked. "As I mentioned, we have pressing matters requiring immediate attention." "We have," I replied calmly. "But before we sign anything, we'd like to introduce some people." On cue, the study door opened. Robert Parker entered, followed by an elegant older woman, Dad's personal attorney, Bennett Hayes. Behind them came two members of the Miles Enterprises board of directors. Jack's expression flickered between confusion and alarm. "What is this?" "This," I said, placing Dad's will on the desk, "is a copy of our father's actual will, the one you knew existed because he reviewed it with all his senior executives last year." The color drained from Jack's face. "Where did you?" "Dad kept copies in his safe deposit box," Emma explained. "Along with some very interesting company records." Bennett Hayes stepped forward. "As James Miles's personal attorney, I can confirm this is his most recent will, properly executed and witnessed. I hold the official copy in my firm's records." Jack's corporate lawyer, Carter, looked stunned. "I was told there was no will. That everything had been destroyed in an accident." "There was no accident," I said, my voice steadied despite my anger. "Jack lied, to you, to us, and planned to seize control of everything our father built." "These are serious accusations," Jack blustered, but his confidence was visibly crumbling. "I was only trying to ensure business continuity during a difficult time. By presenting false documents and attempting to defraud the rightful heirs." Bennett asked sharply. "That's not continuity. That's criminal." One of the board members, Roman, spoke up. "The board will need to address this immediately. Jack's actions represent a serious breach of fiduciary duty." Jack looked desperately around the room, finding no allies. "This is a misunderstanding. I was only acting in the family's best interests." "And the funds you diverted to Pinnacle Ventures?" I asked, referencing information from the USB drive. "Was that in the family's best interest, too?" Jack's face went completely white. "How did you?" "Dad knew," Emma said quietly. "He was gathering evidence." "That's probably." For the next hour, the full extent of Jack's betrayal unfolded. He hadn't just planned to seize control of the company, he had been embezzling funds for years. Dad had suspected it, quietly gathering evidence before confronting him. Now, with the truth laid bare, Jack and Gianna were escorted off the property by security. The board called an emergency session, and Bennett began the formal process of executing Dad's will. Left alone in the study with Emma, I finally let my guard down. I can't believe he would do this. Dad trusted him. Emma put a reassuring arm around me. Dad also protected against it. He made sure we had everything we needed to expose the truth. I nodded, my gaze drifting across the study, filled with memories of late-night talks and quiet lessons. My eyes landed on the architectural plans for the community center, Dad's legacy project. Now, it was my responsibility to see it through. What will you do about the CEO position? Emma asked. Dad named you in the will, but you have your firm in New York. I traced my fingers over the blueprints, imagining the future they represented. I think it's time to come home. Dad built something meaningful here, and he trusted me to carry it forward. 1 month later, I stood on the vacant downtown lot where the Miles Community Center would soon rise. The groundbreaking ceremony was scheduled for the next day, and construction equipment was already in place. But the project had grown beyond Dad's original vision. In addition to affordable housing and a medical clinic, we were building an educational center to train underprivileged youth in construction and architecture, bridging opportunity and ambition. Jack had been removed from the company and now faced criminal charges for embezzlement. He and Gianna had left town, their carefully curated social standing in ruins. Emma had returned to Boston but planned to split her time between her medical career and her board responsibilities. We had also discovered that Dad had been quietly funding a medical research initiative in Mom's name at Emma's hospital, another piece of his legacy neither of us had known about. As the sun dipped below the skyline, a sense of peace settled over me. Dad had prepared us for this, in ways we never realized, not just with financial security but with the wisdom, values, and strength to carry on his work. We're ready for tomorrow's ceremony, Miss Miles, my project manager, Mark, called from across the lot. I nodded. Thank you, Mark. Slipping my hand into my pocket, I felt the cool metal of the key to Dad's safe deposit box, a reminder that the most important inheritances aren't just material things. Jack had been so focused on taking that he completely missed the true wealth Dad had built, not just in assets, but in relationships, respect, and a vision for the future. While my cousins schemed for power, Dad had been quietly shaping a legacy of giving. Standing there on the threshold of that future, I silently thanked my father for his final lesson: true legacy isn't measured in wealth or property. It's in the positive change we create, the lives we uplift, and the wisdom we pass on. Jack had tried to steal an inheritance. But he could never touch the real wealth Dad had left us, the chance to make a difference.